that each of our governments and our systems might operate a little bit uniquely, and we chose to respect those differences and acknowledge that we would each have to navigate our paths in accordance with the organizational structure. Subsequent to this initial design, we later reached out extensively to the municipalities where we know so much of the planning and investment is actually going to happen. So we could develop this regional framework, but ultimately the extent to which things get implemented ends up being contingent upon the amount of participation that we have at the municipal level. We, in the last 2 years, well, about a year ago, we developed a mayor's action pledge. About half of the cities in Broward County ended up participating in that process, but it was a commitment to support the Regional Climate Action Plan and to participate in the implementation. We brought formally into the compact planning process a municipal representative from within each one of the counties. In our case, it's the city of Fort Lauderdale. We also expanded the staff steering committee to include environmental participation with the Nature Conservancy. We have the Regional Water Management District, which of course is going to be instrumental in terms of our adaptation initiatives that has representation. And then the Institute of Sustainable Communities has been an important facilitator. We found that it was very helpful to have kind of this neutral voice who was helping to facilitate the collaboration, because we knew that many of our communities came into this process with quite a bit of history behind ourselves too, a lot of competition for resources, and sometimes it was going to be helpful to have this neutral party helping to facilitate that exercise. We also have involved in this process the Regional Planning Council. It's the South Florida Regional Planning Council. And what we found was that by working together as a region, it made it much easier for the entities who had expertise and resources to come aid our process. Had we been working individually with 106 different cities, or even as the 4 different counties, we wouldn't have been able to garner the attention of NOAA or the Department of Transportation or the USGS to allow the same level of technical support to each one of these communities. But when we came together as a region representing, nearly 2 million residents and having the collective will of our elected leaders behind us, we were able to gain quite a bit in the way of support in our process. And I have to say that through the academic institutions and through the federal partnerships, it was this investment of technical support and services that served to really accelerate the process for us. They helped in the development of a regional greenhouse gas emissions baseline, as I mentioned. Here we developed a unified sea level rise projection. We utilized, in the end, a methodology developed by the Army Corps of Engineers that was adapted, recognizing that most of the investments that are going to happen at the scale of regional governments are going to happen within the next 50 years, and that there was a great deal of uncertainty at the time about the extent of sea level rise that we would experience in the 2100 time frame. So as a result, we chose at this point in time to bracket the planning to the 2050 horizon and utilize the 9 to 24 inch sea level rise projection for our regional planning processes. I want to share that subsequent to this, all 4 of our counties are now integrating this and other guidance into our respective comprehensive plans. Broward County has formally integrated the 9 to 24 inch projection into our comprehensive plan, and we've also inserted this information into our countywide land use plan. So again, while we have the regional process, it's very dependent upon each of the communities then beginning to integrate it into our respective planning processes, whether it's local mitigation strategies or post-development, post-disaster redevelopment plans, water supply plans, transportation plans. We've acknowledged the importance of these long-term planning processes to actually arrive at implementation. And then we also worked with NOAA in order to develop a uniform or regionally coordinated digital elevation model and the methodology for mapping vulnerability, and then went through an exercise in quantifying the extent of economic losses among the types of infrastructure across the 4-county area. And you can see that the numbers presented here, for example, in the area of Broward County, we project with the 3-foot increase in sea level rise, that we have about $7 billion in coastal infrastructure that would be impacted, and $15 billion for low-lying Monroe County. So these were fairly significant numbers, and we went through this assessment based upon schools, parks, streets and railways, hospitals, and the like. Once we had completed the technical process in terms of developing the tools and then going through this economic risk assessment, we then set about actually developing a regional climate action plan. We went out in the community, we solicited the participation of planners, consultant engineers, local government officials, educators, academics, etc., to participate. We convened 3 different work groups initially and then expanded to include agriculture, but we basically organized around the subject matters of the built environment, transportation, and land and natural systems. And this group would be the group that would ultimately help us develop the recommendations that would make it into the action plan, and then also work with us when we went through the public vetting process. We completed a draft plan that was unveiled in 2011 at our 3rd annual summit, and actually completed the plan at the conclusion of our 4th year of having, at the end of the 3rd year of having worked together. It reflected the collaborative input of about 130 different community members, detailed recommendations across 7 critical planning areas, including sustainable communities and transportation, water infrastructure, energy and fuel, risk mitigation, policy and public process, and natural areas and agriculture, I think, completes that. We also developed an implementation guide that details the types of partners that would be pivotal to implementing the recommendations, the resources, whether there's a policy or legislative fix that's needed in order to be able to implement a recommendation, and recommended timelines. And here's the detailing of those subject areas that I went through. And so why is this so critical to our region? Well, like many have already expressed, we see the impacts today. The businesses are seeing the impacts today. Our residents are seeing the impacts today. Even in the absence of a rainfall event, we have individuals in the most high-end parts of Fort Lauderdale where commercial activities are being undertaken, and as a result of extreme high tide, are having claims submitted on the order of $50,000 because they've had 2 feet of seawater at their door as a result of high tide and maybe strong prevailing winds. But we see inadequate seawalls, massive flooding where you can no longer distinguish between the canals and the roadways. We have inadequate drainage infrastructure. We heard the statements about salt water moving up through the stormwater systems. That's the case here. We have major impacts within the real estate market with regards to the liabilities for the individuals as well as the potential buyers. Here again, a stormwater management system where seawater is completely inundating the roadways. We have began to pilot various adaptation measures, valves on these systems that do go a long way towards keeping the saltwater at bay within the infrastructure, but it does go back to that issue of the seawalls and how do you collectively begin to advance the types of improvements that would be needed in your community. Other limitations exist with regard to the way we manage water. We have in Broward County about 1,800 miles of canals that are part of our drainage and water management infrastructure, but the ability to provide the flood control for the inland communities is totally dependent upon the ability to discharge at the coastal or the terminal end. And where we have extreme high tides, where we have strong prevailing winds, already today there are times when we can no longer open the floodgates and provide flood relief for the communities that are inland because it would allow salt water to move into the canals and then would impregnate the aquifer with salt water, thereby compromising our potable water supply. So there is a very thorough understanding about the limitations of the system today, yet there's not the type of collective plan nor availability of funds to undertake the type of reworking of this system that was a major flood control project involving the Army Corps of Engineers in our water management districts dating back to the 1940s, where sea level rise was certainly not contemplated in that design. You can see the extent of the water management network. This is just in Broward County, and how under these extreme high tide events that you simply don't have the capacity for discharge. We have inland communities that during a normal rainfall event, even outside of major flood infrastructure with primary gates, the simple ability to move rainwater off the landscape was compromised, and neighborhoods sat inundated for several days just with you know, a characteristic 5-year storm. But this is another type of example where we had a community up in western Palm Beach, and with a 1 in 100-year flood event, they got about 16 inches of rainfall. This community was unable to discharge into the primary canal network because of the lack of infrastructure. And it really foretells of the future of Southeast Florida if we don't begin to make the types of investments in our system that will deal with these these impacts today, let alone the exacerbated conditions that we'll be experiencing in the coming decades. We too experienced impacts of Sandy, certainly not like we saw observed along the northeast coast, but here we saw the passage of the storm. Yes, we lost quite a bit of sand, felt that everything was well in order, and then 30 days later with an extreme high tide event and just onshore prevailing winds, ended up having a collapse of several blocks of A1A in Fort Lauderdale, which is a major evacuation route for hurricanes within our community. And you can see what this looks like. So we're lacking a lot of the coastal resilience measures that we know really have caught the community up in the Northeast and are now becoming more aware to us down in South Florida. And I would note that in our region we've had a pretty strong resistance to the establishment of dunes, and it was because of the Northeast experience that we're seeing dunes now being actively integrated into our beach nourishment projects. And where are we moving forward today? I wanted to note just a couple of the things and where we're really being able to make advancements because of the regional approach. In the policy arena, we were able to move forward with an amendment to the Florida state law to integrate the concept of adaptation action areas into the Growth Management Act. This is a designation that's designed to allow local governments to begin to prioritize infrastructure improvements and align funding to address sea level rise infrastructure improvements. And we have a number of pilot projects that are taking shape today where communities are making those designations. We're doing advanced hydrologic modeling to better assess how the aquifer interplays in the impacts of sea level rise. We've had a number of pilot grants that have come to the community that have been organized around the Regional Climate Action Plan and its implementation. And the 4-county process is now setting the stage for a broader regional effort, which is a 7-county 50-year planning effort as part of 750, which was a HUD sustainability grant that came to the region, with climate resilience being one of the primary elements in that grant. And we are working with many of the individuals that are identified here in sharing information across our own county and abroad with regards to how regional efforts can help organize resources and accelerate planning processes. And I think that the model has served, we've had a good model here in Southeast Florida. And just again, concluding with this, last year we celebrated the 5th Annual Climate Leadership Summit. It was very well attended. We had the support of the business community. It was co-hosted with the sponsorship of the Broward Workshop, which represents the 100 most prominent CEOs in Broward County. And I think it is a demonstration of the fact that our business community is well aware of the need for very significant investments in infrastructure in order to create a more predictable and viable economic future for our region, for their investments, and for the employees who need to support all of the